Alain whistled long at the luxurious interior of the captain's emergency pod and the size of a large living room a few days later. He had decided to take a look in case there was something useful in there when he was near the pod bays, and even though the pod was the same model, it wasn't made to hold several people inside like the regular crew pods. Even the officers had to share one pod between 3 of them. This one was made to serve at most 2 persons, but the facilities were a lot better than what he had in his own pod. "Damn class difference," he muttered. He stood at the center of the pod and pondered whether or not he should. "Fuck, just do it," he said, and activated the pod's controls at the pilot's seat next to the entrance hatch. The pod wasn't piloted like a regular ship or shuttle, but it featured small thrusters to maneuver it, and the seat would look out directly at any target for docking. The controls displayed a ready status, and Alain buckled up, shut the warship's bay hatch and the pod's hatch, and released the clamps. A quick burst from the thrusters pushed him away from the bay. He kept the burst short as he steered the pod from close to the rear of the warship to his crew pod because he didn't have much experience flying and took things slow in case he made a mistake. On his way along a safe distance from the side of the Walkyria, soft static sounded from his communicator. "Is you in pod?" Asita asked. "Yes, it's me," Alain said, and hoped she understood him well enough without the help of a language device. "Visit me later, I'll show you." "We come later," Asita said, and Alain felt some excitement to have them come by again to see what he did with it. When he was close to his crew pod, he took a few deep breaths to prepare for the most difficult part. In the most delicate way he could muster, he aimed the emergency pod's entrance towards the docking hatch of his crew pod and moved it closer slowly. He held his breath when both docking rings were just a hand's breadth apart and hoped the moorings could withstand the shock. The clunk at contact resonated through the whelmed pod with the minor shock at stopping. The hammer sounds from the clamps engaging followed, and Alain dared to exhale. The controls were green, and he stepped out of the pilot's seat, equalized the 2 pods' atmospheres, and opened the hatches of both pods. The environmental controls of the crew pod were still green, and he went out the airlock to check on the pod's anchors. His relief was complete when they were fine, and he went underneath the emergency pod, extended the struts with the manual controls towards the Walkyria's hull, and bolted the feet to the hull with brackets and a nail gun powerful enough to penetrate the steel plating. He stepped back after he was done to admire the new extension to his home. "Home, sweeter home," he said, wondering if an extension larger than the original could still be called an extension. Back inside and out of his suit, he looked over the emergency equipment and supplies and left them as they were, because they weren't in the way, and they were necessary in an emergency in any case. The kitchen corner was fully functional, and when he pulled down the wall bed, he laid down on his back with his arms spread to enjoy the large size and the glee at no longer sleeping in a cramped space from that moment on. Asitha's voice sounded from his communicator, and he stood up quickly to answer her. "I'm here," he said. "We can come?" "Yes, I'll be waiting," he said, and looked around for anything embarrassing they might see, even though he told himself this wasn't like his small apartment back home, and he'd already acted like a fool in front of them during their first visit. "So much space," Tayness said, when she entered the pod first and gazed upon the empty space at the center. "My guess is they didn't place any furniture in here to keep the space clear for multiple purposes," Alain said. "I can imagine when the crew needs to bail and end up on some planet, they need a common space for the officers to meet." Tayness nodded. "What are you going to do with it?" "Move in here, of course," he said, and thought about what he could get in here. "I'm sure I can find a good couch and a table, and it's trivial to set up a large screen to watch movies on. It'll be like a real home then." "So lucky," Asita said, and Alain thought her pouting ears turned backwards looked cute. "Why not see if there's a pod on the Amaroth that you can use in the same manner? A captain's pod as well." "Yes, we should," Tayness said. Asitha looked at the pleading in her expression and knew she couldn't use regulations as an excuse to not try the same thing with their pod. More space for themselves was something she wished for as well. "We'll take a look after our next shift," she said, and Tayness smiled. "We'll eat and sleep now, then we can start early." "Great," Tayness said, and Alain chuckled at the happy expression on her face. Tayness looked at the map displayed on her arm screen. These should be the ones for the officers. Asitha shone her light down the corridor and the row of access hatches to the emergency pods. Might as well start at the captain's one, since that is likely the most comfortable one. They moved along the corridor and stopped at the hatch with the captain symbol on it, a circle with a single vertical line dividing it. Asitha unlocked it and they shone their lights inside. "This looks nice," said Tiness at the light gray and roomy interior, and they went inside. "I'm definitely going to try the shower first," said Asitha when she looked inside the extra-large shower at one side. "This thing is almost as big as our pod." Tiness chuckled and examined the contents of the compartments in the back. "Only a simple kitchen here, nothing like the one in Alan's pod." Asitha shone her light along the seats and table at the side. "Still, a lot more space than what we have now. I think we'll take this if you agree." "Definitely. I can't wait to stretch my tail in comfort." Asitha shone her light around. "I think there's just one problem." "You can't fly the pod," said Alan when he was curious to hear if the girls had found a usable pod and contacted them. "It has no controls like yours," said Asitha. "Looks like we stuck with our small home unless we can think how to move it." Alan pondered a way to move the pod and thought he remembered something that could be the solution. "Wait there. Maybe I know a way, but I have to make sure first." "Yes," said Asitha. Asitha and Tiness kept themselves busy with exploring the other pods and collecting any rations that had been forgotten when the Amaroth had been abandoned. Tiness floated towards the back of the captain's pod to look outside when Alan called in. "Are you still there?" "Yes, we still here," said Asitha. "Good. Prepare to release the pod." "Release?" asked Asitha. "Why?" Tiness's eyes grew large when she saw the cargo picker heading towards them. "Asitha! Look!" Asitha floated over to the window. "Alan?" Alan chuckled. "Surprise! But you're not allowed on ship." Alan steered the vessel that was used for transporting cargo containers at spaceports towards the Sylph pod. "And I am not coming on board, am I? I just happen to give a hand to someone who does the same job I do while out here in space." Tiness chuckled. "Where you get this vessel?" "I thought I saw it when I went through one of the ship's cargo bays a while ago, and I was right. Luckily, it was in working condition because it had been smashed into the racks during the crash." He patted the console in front of him. "Good thing it's a sturdy one." He slowed down near the pod and used the extended clamps on two arms to grip the pod's hull. "I've got a hold of the pod. You can release it now." Asitha punched the manual commands on the control pad in the corridor, and the clamps released their hold of the pod's hatch and supporting struts. Tiness gave a positive signal when she saw the pod was free to go. "Pod is free. You can pull back," Asitha said. Alan fired the thrusters of the cargo picker and pulled the pod away from its bay, while Asitha and Tiness observed it from a window in the corridor. "Guide me at your crew pod," he said. "We going there now," Asitha said, and hurried with Tiness to their pod. Alan was near the pod when the girls arrived, and they took positions on either side of their crew pod to keep an eye on the docking. Asitha guided him to align the hatches and activated the clamps when both pods connected. "Very good," Asitha said. "You can let go now." "All right," Alan said and released the clamps from this pod and pulled back. Asitha and Tiness braced the new pod with several extendable struts and welded them to the hull of the Amaroth and the pod itself. By the time they were done, Alan had showed up to check on their progress. "How is it?" he asked. Asitha rolled up the hose on the welder. "We just finished. Pod is secure." "All is good inside," said Tiness from inside the pod. "Atmosphere good and no problem with power connections." Alan smiled. "That's good. I hope you'll get as much enjoyment from the extra space as I will." Tiness looked at the comparatively spacious interior. "Will you have drink with us?" she said, and tensed her tail at the sudden boldness she'd never felt before. "If it's okay, I'd love to," he said, and felt as if he'd been invited for the first time to a girl's place and not specifically a Sylph dwelling. "We want to thank you for help," Asitha said. "This means much to us." "Let me freshen up first," Alan said. "I'll be back in a short while." Although there was no point to it, Alan knocked on the outer airlock door of the Sylph pod before Tiness gestured she'd open the hatch from inside. He went in, waited for the atmosphere cycle, and stepped with slight hesitation and hot feeling into Sylph territory. I kind of feel we do something historical here, but we can't let anyone know, he said after he took off his helmet. Tynes chuckled. Maybe we'll be famous when we're old and our worlds are truly at peace. He reached into his pack and pulled out several small containers and a bottle of greenish liquor popular in the tropics. I brought some snacks and something else to try, to celebrate both our expanded homes. Thank you, said Tynes and took them from him. We prepared a few things, but they're probably too bland compared to what you're used to. Alain hung his suit in a free locker. Don't worry about that. I'm still curious to find out what kinds of food you eat. He followed Tynes through the regular crew pod and into the new one, where Asitha set the table at the side with plates of snacks, bottles, and cups. She smiled at him. Have a seat. The plates were filled with bland-colored and smelling cubes. Most were grayish-brown with a shredded meat structure. Others had darker red and green splotches. Tynes brought napkins and she and Asitha sat down and poured drinks. Asitha leaned a little forward. It's not much, but it's the best we can offer as thanks for helping us get this pod. He gazed at both girls and was happy to have made contact with the Sylph. It was my pleasure to help out, and I'm glad both you and me have increased our comfort on this wreckage floating in space, he said and lifted his cup. Let's forget about what's out there for a while and celebrate what we gained today. Agreed, said Tynes and drank. Asitha pointed at the plates. These and these are products made from fish and other sea creatures, and these are from various animals that are our main food source. If there's nothing you like, I won't blame you. She chuckled, especially after we tasted your food. Alain chuckled. I can't diss it before I try it, he said, and took one of the cubes that had 2 gray-brown layers, smelled it, then put it in his mouth. Asitha and Tynes watched him chew slowly. He nodded. It reminds me of what's called tuna flavored in my world. The taste is faint, but it's there, so it's not bad. The girls' ears sagged slightly in relief. I'm glad you didn't start with finding it disgusting, Tynes said. He chuckled again. There's still a chance I will spit like a volcano and keel over from the taste of the others. So keep the bottles open so I can flush away the taste. Tynes giggled. Lucky we have enough to drink then. After having tasted everything, Alain pondered ways to improve the taste of the Sylph food. You just heat it straight from the container? Tynes nodded. Not much else we can do with it. Mind if I take a few with me to try things? I'll bring some of the food I have so you can try that. Tynes's ears pricked up. Sure, we'd love to try out more human food. Alain chuckled. All right, he said and chewed on a pork chicken flavored cube. I'm going to take one of the cooking units from a nearby mess hall and install it in my pod so I can cook the supplies that were left. How about coming over later when I've settled in? Tynes looked at Asitha. We'd like that, Asitha said. Maybe we can install some of the equipment from the Emerald in here and do the same. Oh, then we can exchange meals, said Alain. There's a thing we call spaghetti, and it's a great base for a fulfilling meal. Alain went back to his pod after all 3 of them had had their fill of drinking and snacking with a large bag of various Sylph food. He threw about what he could do with it, and when his mind turned to salads, he pondered reviving 1 or 2 of the local greenhouses to both get a natural quality from the air purifier and to grow fresh vegetables. The greenhouses were mostly automated, and that gave him enough confidence to be able to do it. He resolved to look into it right after installing the cooker in his pod. Tynes sighed with flattened ears and leaned back in the soft fabric of the curved couch Alain had confiscated from an officer's suite. He had invited the girls over to see what he'd done to the pod and try out his cooking, and what he'd done with the Sylph food. What's wrong? He asked as he brought out snacks. We can't install a cooker in our pod, said Asitha. The equipment in the central mess hall isn't modular, so we can't take a unit out. No other places to find them? Asitha shook her head. There's only the single mess hall on the ship, and our equipment isn't compatible with your power sources, so it's no use installing one from the Walkurea. Alain sat down on one end of the couch. No other equipment to cook with? No, not even the portables that squads use out in the field. Alain sipped his drink and thought, guess you'll just have to use the kitchen here. The girls turned their heads towards him at once. Here? He cocked his head. Why not? I have no problems with you coming over, and I wanted to invite you more often anyway, he said and grinned a little. If you in exchange leave some for me, then I'd be fine with it. Tynes laughed out loud. You really are not the kind of human I expected you to be. He smiled proudly. Good, because I don't like to be what's usually expected. Asitha giggled. Then we'll take you up on your offer. Just don't complain that our cooking's bad. He stuck out his hand. Deal. I won't complain. I'll only voice opinions and suggestions. Asitha shook his hand and he realized it was the first time they actually touched each other. He liked the softness of the thin layer of fur of her hand. For now, I'll present you with a few ideas for Sylth food. I'll start on it after a drink, though. I just hooked up the screen and set up the sound system. Screen and sound system? Asked Tynes. Alain fished a remote from the side pocket of the couch and pushed the power button. A large screen rolled down close to the opposite wall and a media menu appeared. He selected a classic movie and it began. I love good movies, so when I noticed the screen and a projector lying in a storage closet, I just had to take it with me. The sound system I built from spare parts. He retracted the screen, began playing his music collection on random, and finished his drink. I'll begin cooking. I feel hunger coming up. Tynes sat up straight. Can I watch? I'd like to see what you're doing with our food. Sure. Give me a hand at the same time. She moved up next to him in the kitchen, then looked at her hands. Oh, is it okay though? Our hands are covered in fur, unlike yours. He looked at the slender fingers in her hands that had fur on top, but none on the inside. Do you usually do anything before you prepare food? She looked at him. We brush our hands or rub them with water if we have no brush. No problem then. You're not disgusted by hair in your food? He chuckled. Of course I don't like hair in my food, don't you? Yes. Then I won't have to worry if what you do before preparing food prevents what you don't like yourself, right? Right, she said and rinsed her hands thoroughly under the kitchen faucet. Alain noticed her large and fluffy tail swaying and smiled. Cute, he thought, and wondered what it felt like before he turned his attention back to the counter and the containers of Sylth and human food he had chosen for the meal. He looked back towards Asitha. Asitha, if you like to, have a look through my media collection. I don't have any Sylth media, but maybe there's something you like. She turned towards him. Then I will. The kitchen's too small for the three of us to cook anyway, she said and took the remote from the armrest. Sounds of various movie scenes and rattling and clicking from the kitchen filled the pod, and it reminded Alain of his young years at his home when his parents cooked together and he searched for something to watch while they'd eat. He chuckled and Tynes looked up puzzled from dicing the fish and meat. Did I do something wrong? He gave her a warm smile. No, it's just that this reminds me of when I was young, and I never imagined I would relive these moments in my own home. Yet here it happened, and even in the company of two Sylth, she chuckled. It must be very weird for you. He mixed spices and herbs in a small bowl. It's very comforting, actually, and it doesn't matter whether you're Sylth or human. I can say for certain it's fun to have you two over. Tynes smiled. It is fun indeed to spend some time together, although it's still a little strange to be with a human. She looked up at him at once. I don't mean it in a bad way. It's just that we're not used to meeting other species. Alain chuckled. I know what you mean. I read that your society is pretty closed, and most of your kind never met an alien. Humans mingle much easier in that regard. She nodded. I'm sure we'll adjust quickly around you. You're really nice, he chuckled. Thanks, he said. He deworte and looked at Asitha's concentration as she went over the media list with the help of the translation tablet. I think Asitha is well on her way to get used to human things. Tynes giggled. Seems so. Asitha looked at all the food placed on the low table before her. This all looks very good, she said and sniffed the air. And it smells great. Alain smiled. Dig in then. Tynes had to suffer enough just watching the food and not tasting it. Tynes's ears twitched a little. It wasn't that bad, he grinned. Oh, I thought I saw your arrows flicker and your tail sway each time I finished frying a batch and figured you were eager to try some. She looked away in embarrassment. I thought humans couldn't read our body language. He laughed once. I don't mean to be rude, but I grew up around cats and I learned a thing or two from them. Asitha raised an eyebrow. You're saying we're just like your domestic house pets? He held up his hands. Of course not. But since humans have no tail and can't move their ears, you have more ways to express yourselves, and I noticed it sooner. She nodded and chuckled. Good answer, you're off the hook, she said with a mischievous smile and took one of the empty plates. Now to find out if what you made is good. Alain watched bemusedly as the girls sampled the food and stacked more on their plates while their ears twitched left and right and their tails quivered at every bite. He had to admit he was happy to eat some real cooked food instead of heated up ready-made meals, and didn't hold back either. Tynus explained to Asitha what they'd done with their own bland food while they ate, with some clarifications from Alain, and they discussed food and ate and drank it until all three were stuffed and slumped back into the soft couch. Asitha puffed. That was good, she said and put her hands on her full belly. I don't think I ever ate so much because it tastes so good, said Tynus. No wonder I heard so many humans are fat. Alain chuckled. Yeah, eating is a favorite pastime and a great comforter. It seems so are movies and series, said Asitha. You have so many here. And that's only a rather small portion of what's available because I look for quality in the first place, Alain said, although I do have plenty of dumb and simply fun ones. Did you find something interesting? Asitha went over the list in her mind while staring at the blank screen. There's a lot that caught my interest, but I'd have to watch to know for sure if I like it or not, she said and looked at him. While I looked up more information on the genres, I noticed you only have a few of the superhero genre. Alain nodded. I think only a few of the characters are really interesting, but I have to admit, a few of the movies I have are because I like to watch the female character. He chuckled. I'd rather watch women than men anyway. Men are just ugly. Asitha laughed and Tynus chuckled. You have a specific taste. He shrugged. My taste is in cute, and men don't fall into that category in my eyes. He said and took his cup. For that kind of thinking, you'll have to speak to most human women. Unless they send you a woman to work with, I doubt we'll ever get to speak to one. Asitha chuckled and looked at the screen. Oh, there was one that seemed more different from most. She picked up the remote and scrolled through the categories until she found it and pressed play. Alain smiled at the familiar sound of a squeaking wind vane and crickets chirping under the blazing sun. This is indeed one of my very favorite classics, he said while four cowboys walked into a remote train station. Asitha looked at him. Can we watch this? Of course, it'll give us time to digest and relaxation, he said and leaned back his head while enjoying the pleasant atmosphere and the company of the two girls fixated on the screen. The sudden loud whistle of a steam train startled them, and Tynus spilled her drink on her coverall. Shaz, Asitha sniggered. You're on laundry duty now. Tynus plucked at her front. I have to go back, otherwise I'll smell the whole time. If it's all right with you, you can borrow a shirt from me, Alain said, and gestured at the crew pod. I have a few big ones that will probably fit. You don't have to. He stood up. Don't worry, he said, but then realized something. Unless you don't like the idea of wearing shirts or human clothing. No, thanks you, Tynus said and shook her head. I'll be glad I won't have to go back and forth and miss out. He smiled. Follow me then. She followed him to his personal quarters and opened the wall closet. Pick out what you like, he said when he pulled out a stack of t-shirts and put it on his bed. I'm afraid this is the only thing you'll fit in. She shook her head again. I'm glad for your offer. Take your time, he said and stepped out. Tynus examined the t-shirts in various colors and sporting different prints of text and images, and settled on a short-sleeved black one with the white outline of a mountain range printed on it. She looked at herself in the small swivel mirror on the wall. Good, she said when the t-shirt was long enough to reach her thighs, and chuckled at the image of her wearing Alain's clothing, then blushed as she realized his scent had enveloped her. She and Asitha had clearly smelled his scent in the cramped space of the pod, but being wrapped in it was something other than it just hanging in the air. She sighed and tried not to think about how long it had been since she'd been embraced by a man, even if it was just for comfort. She folded up the rest of the t-shirts and placed the stack back in the closet. Oh, nice choice, Alain said when she returned to the big pod. The black and white creates a good contrast with your pretty white fur. Asitha nodded. almost like the clothing we wear at home. Tynes blushed again and quickly sat down on the couch and took her cup to sip the soothing liquor. You wear shirts usually? Alain asked. A garment a little longer than this, and with wider sleeves, or none at all. It's the most practical clothing to wear for us. With your tails and all, right? Yes. He glanced at Tynes's shapely white legs and her tail wrapped around her feet. I guess the space suits and the tight coveralls you're wearing are uncomfortable then. Asitha nodded. We keep our tails usually in one of our suit's legs, and it's frustrating when we can't move it freely for a long time. Alain gestured towards his quarters. Do you want a shirt too? Asita looked at Tynes and fiddled with her cup. She did think it would be a lot more comfortable, but to act so carefree in front of a human felt embarrassing to her. I don't know. Have a look with Tynes. If you don't want to, you don't have to, Alain said. I can imagine it feels weird to do that here with a human around. He began collecting the dirty dishes from the table. I'll put these in the dishwasher in the meantime. Asita looked at Tynes and she took her hand. I think I already know which one will look good on you, she said, and pulled Asita along when she stood up and headed towards Alain's quarters. Asita looked at the vaguely blue and gray striped t-shirt. It does look nice, but I don't know if I can wear it. Tynes hung the t-shirt from Asita's shoulders. Give it a try at least. I'm kind of glad for the drink accident, you know? Anytime I can stay out of our restricting work clothing, I'm thankful for. She stepped through the doorway. Don't take too long. Asita sighed. She would feel more comfortable after changing, but she couldn't stop the wariness she felt in a strange environment. She took a deep breath. It's just that I need to get used hanging around with a human, she thought. That's all? When she returned to the pod, Tynes and Alain gave her an approving smile. That looks very good on you, said Alain. Certainly better than on me. Told you, said Tynes. Asita blushed, but her ears stood up more. Enough with the clothing for now. I want to drink and watch the movie. Alain picked up the bottle. Sit down and we'll continue the show, he said, and topped off their cups. Sleep well. You too, said Tynes to Asita after they returned to their own crew pod. The fun time they had at Alain's pod had given her a bit of energy, despite eating and drinking so much that she felt like toppling over. She giggled as she pulled Alain's t-shirt over her head, but stopped for a moment to smell his scent once more. She didn't know if all humans smelled like this, but his was comforting to her. She took off the t-shirt completely and held it against her chest, glad she convinced him that they would wash it before returning it to him. She tumbled into her bed and closed her eyes. Asita held the t-shirt she had worn in front of her and looked at her reflection in the mirror and smiled slightly. The colors do look good, she said softly, and hung it on one of the hooks next to the mirror. When she stepped back, her smile vanished at the sight of her bare reflection. She averted her eyes and crawled into bed. Alain chuckled as he lay in bed, and the thought of laying his head on those two furry laps vied for his attention again. They'll say I'm crazy, he said to himself and turned off the bed light to enjoy the space on the large bed. Alain? Alain stopped unscrewing a control box for a moment when the call came in through the shared communication channel. Tynes? Yes, can I ask a question if you have time? Alain smiled a little. Sure, no problem. Tynes was glad, and the nervousness of initiating the call faded slowly. Can we come later to borrow kitchen? We decided on meal schedule and like to prepare everything for period. Alain was glad to hear they took him up on the offer he had made. Fine by me. Any particular things you like? I'll pick it up from the storage here on my way back. Tynes felt a little guilty about asking him for ingredients. Just simple pork and chicken and carrots. Alain chuckled. No need to hold back. Just ask what's on your mind. We're trading after all. But is unfair trading because your food's so much tastier than ours? Alain laughed. Don't worry about that. I can spice it up nicely and it's still nutritious, so it's no loss. And I get pleasant company over for a while on top of that. So how about some beef and that sweet bean paste that you loved? Tynes remembered the taste and her stomach voted in favors to ask him for it. Yes, please. Then salty potatoes too, please, asked Asita. Alain chuckled at her sudden request. All right, Alain said. I've stocked up the storage closet in the pod, so have a look through it when you're there. Thank you, came from both girls. You're welcome, he said. You're working right now? Tynes glanced at red-colored barrels left and right of her. Yes, but in storage they didn't empty, and it full of exploding fuel. Alone? Yes, a Sitha at back of Amaroth for special order. We not know this fuel here, but need part for sending. Just be careful, okay? Tynes smiled a little. Yes, she said. I think I asked you question to take mind away from being here. Alain chuckled. I'm glad I could help, he said, and thought about how easier it was to communicate with them face to face when they could use the translating software and gestures. I'm not good at small talk, but as long as it'll distract you, I'll try. Tynes chuckled and began cutting wires. What you normally talk about? Alain pondered for a moment. I guess work-related things. Technical stuff. My favorite genres of media. How about you? I not talk much. Often just listen to others talking about life. Or when alone I watch media to learn new things. Oh, so you like to learn. I'm always curious about new... Alain said when a sharp bang and a crash sounded from Tynes's side. Tynes! Tynes! A Sitha called out. Deja Bodu! Tynes! Static was the only reply, and Alain dropped his tools. Asitha, where was she working? Close to front! He pushed himself hard out of the short corridor he was working in. I know a place where I can cross over into the Amaroth. It's halfway from the center to my right. Where do I go from there? But you forbidden to come on Amaroth. Alain jumped against wall bracing to speed up through another corridor leading towards the breach. Screw that. Tynes might be hurt or worse. Where do I find her? Asitha jumped from her spot towards the doorway from the compartment she worked in. Go further into ship and go to side at main passage. Tell me number on wall when you there. Alain saw the open red door to the storage after entering the corridor Asitha had guided him to. Tynes? He called out again when he bounced through this doorway. Tynes looked at the human entering and her eyes went wide. Alain? Why you here? He spotted Tynes, the backpack of her suit stuck on a rack and her holding tight onto her lower arm with her other hand. Tynes, are you okay? He pushed himself towards her and noted the gash in her suit that she held closed and the crack on her arm display. He gave her a thumbs up and was relieved to see her give one in return. Tynes okay? Asked Asitha. Tynes seems fine, but her suit is torn and her communicator is damaged, Alain said. Her backpack is stuck somewhere, but I'll seal her suit first. Good, I'm glad, Asitha said and relaxed a little as she floated quickly through a small hall towards the front. He pulled out a roll of gray tape from the storage bag at his front, tore off a piece and put it over the tear in Tynes's suit while she slowly pulled her fingers away. She let out a deep breath when her suit was temporarily sealed again. She turned on her helmet light and gave Alain a grateful smile. Thank you. He turned on his light to return a relieved smile and examined her back to see where it was stuck. A sign attached to the rack had wedged itself between the pack and her suite, but he freed her with some wriggling and pushing against her pack. She's free now, he said to Asitha. I'll go with her to your pod. Thank you, Asitha said. I meet you there. Luckily, only your suit was torn and you didn't get hurt, Asitha said as she looked at the torn arm and smiled at Alain. I'm glad you had that tape with you. I always carry it with me in case of an emergency, he said. You never know when an accident can happen, especially with the damaged structure we have to work in. Tynes smiled softly at him. Thank you for rescuing me. He chuckled. You're welcome, but Asitha would have rescued you anyway. She put her hands on his. But you still broke the agreement to come for me. He blushed a little at her adoring eyes. Yeah, I didn't know if you were in a life-threatening situation or not. Some things are more important than a political disagreement. Asitha sat back in her seat. I can't wait to find out how much trouble we'll get into. I'll take the blame, said Alain. It was me who entered the Amaroth. But they'll want to know why you knew she was in danger. He pondered for a moment. Just say I was curious and happened to be there at the right time and place. No, said Tynes. I'll take the blame. Alain smiled at her. You didn't do anything wrong, though. Still, she said and pouted. Alain chuckled at her cute face, then looked at Asitha. Hang on, Did you actually get an alarm when I crossed over? Asitha's eyes grew large when she realized she had not. I didn't, she said, and took the tablet from the side of the table. She typed on it and stared at it. The system didn't detect you. Alain raised his eyebrow. Is it broken? Asitha typed some more and shook her head. It's working fine, Alain hummed. How does it detect humans in the first place? I don't know, said Asitha. Some difference between us. Alain looked sideways at T-Ness's suit draped over the free seat. I doubt its movement, and it's hard to detect differences between us when we're inside our suits. There's no way to see or hear us. Asitha nodded and Alain gazed at her. Ah, hearing. The system probably listens for radio communication. But because I talked to you on a shared channel, it didn't register as a human-specific communication. Asitha pondered it. That sounds plausible, she said. I wouldn't be surprised it was that simple. They didn't want to spend much money on this recovery project. Alain folded his arms and nodded. Yeah, it's mostly a political stunt on our side as well. Something to distract the people with and look good for their political prowess. T-Ness leaned on the table. But we're stuck here in the middle. Alain grinned. All the more reason to take what we can get and make the best of our time here. Asitha stood up and returned with a bottle and cups. I think we'll go with your suggestion and take things more easily. From now on, Tynus and I will work no more than a short distance from each other. I don't want to see another accident. Alain nodded. Good. She poured the drinks and looked at Alain. Also, I'd like to suggest we use our shared channel by default. I don't want to find out you've had an accident when we could have helped. He smiled a little. Thank you. Tynus smiled at him. I owe you one, but don't make me pay back in the same matter. He chuckled. I'll try not to. I'd rather drink after a peaceful day, he said, and they toasted to that. Tynus looked at the containers in Alain's storage closet. What would he like? Asitha moved up behind her. Thinking what to give your hero as a reward? Tynus giggled. I just want to show my gratitude and do something for him in return. Asitha chuckled. At least he's not like the usual hero in our homeworld stories and expects you to give your body to him. The image of Alan taking her for pleasures of the flesh popped up in her mind. He wouldn't, she said and turned to Asitha. Or would he? He knows a few things about Sylth, so maybe he thinks that's normal for us. She looked away. No, he isn't like that. Humans are different and he wouldn't expect that. He wouldn't even want to with me. Asitha chuckled. I was just teasing, she said, eating, and smiled a little mischievously. But I'm not so sure he would turn you down when you offer. Why would he? Tynus took a container from the closet and stared at the label without reading it. She said, and imagined his reaction to her if he'd see her completely in the fur, then took more containers. He would. He just would. She placed the containers on the counter. He would pick you for sure if you offered yourself. Asitha's smile vanished. No, he wouldn't. Tynus turned around. He said you look good. Asitha blushed. He also said you have pretty fur. Tynus blushed a little at the memory of his compliment. Asitha opened the containers and began cutting the meat. It's silly anyway. Humans and us are too different, and he said he prefers to look at women. Tynus nodded and cut the vegetables. Yes. Alain hoped the girls were comfortable being alone in his pod after he'd left them there to pick up the food they had asked for earlier. Despite knowing he had nothing embarrassing to hide, like naughty photos or movies or dirty laundry laying about, he still felt a little nervous about what they might think of him and his place when he entered the airlock of his pod. When he stepped into the large pod, the sight of the two girls in their casual, long Sylth garments lifted his heart. Their shirts reached down to halfway their thighs, and the word sexy lit up in his mind. Idiot. He thought, but he still took in the view of the feline creatures at the kitchen corner. They looked back at him, and he thought he noticed a little hesitation in their greeting. We already begun, said Asitha. This time it's our turn to make something for you as well, so you can take it easy. He chuckled and stacked the extra containers and some glasses he picked up from one mess on the side of the counter. I'm looking forward to it. He sat down and began his daily routine of checking for changes in the Walkuria's systems and skimming over the logged messages but his eyes were drawn to the fluffy white and the red-striped tails and their owners while they were cooking. He couldn't quite get the idea of stroking their tails and petting those two out of his mind. "You're going to cause an interplanetary incident, you idiot," he muttered as he redirected his attention once again to his tablet. "What was that?" He looked up startled at Tynes standing at the couch. "What was what? I thought you said something." He sagged in relief that she hadn't heard. "I was just talking to myself when I checked the systems," he said and gestured at his tablet. She smiled. "Oh, okay," she said and held up a glass. "Shall I pour you a drink?" "I won't say no to such an offer," he said. "Just be careful you're not going to spoil me." She giggled as she picked up a bottle from a cabinet Alain had found in another suite and made it home to his booze stash. "You deserve it, at least for now." He nodded at his approval of the whiskey she presented. "Then I'll make full use of it." He chuckled and followed her swaying curves and tail with his eyes as she returned to Asitha's side. Asitha grinned a little. "Keep it up, and he will accept your offer when you do," she said quietly. Tynes blushed and chuckled. "Hush, I'm not going to do that," she said and continued with her task. Alain put his tablet aside when he was done, started his music playlist, and took the opportunity while waiting for the girls to finish cooking to sort out his laundry and get the machine running. When he returned, he noticed the girls' tails swaying in rhythm with the beat of the rock blues music playing. He chuckled and watched them until Asitha looked back at him. "What?" "It looks like you're enjoying the music," she chuckled. "It has a catchy rhythm. What is this music called?" He moved up to them and peeked at what they were doing and smelled the first scent of frying meat. "This band plays mostly rock blues." "Rock blues?" asked Tynes. "It's one of many genres we have in music. You'd have to listen to several songs to begin to understand the genre and the differences between them. Even when listening to a lot, it's not always clear." "I like it," said Tynes and swayed her hips. "It is energetic." "One more reason to come over then," chuckled Alain and snatched a carrot. "Hey, no snacking before any meal," Tynes said and pushed Alain towards the couch. "Go do whatever you do and wait until we're done." Alain laughed. "Yes, Mom," he said and made crunching noises on his way from chewing on the carrot. He spent his time reading a weapon manual he'd found a short while ago in a mostly empty armory because he was curious about the technology. He put it aside when the girls placed the first plates on the table and examined each one. "If it tastes as good as it smells, marry me." "What?" said Asita and almost dropped the plate she held. "Who?" He grinned wide. "The way to a man's heart is through his stomach, as we say back home. And I agree. A woman who can cook well is a keeper. Two are a treasure to behold." Asitha blushed. "You humans are strange," she said, and placed her plate on the table and returned to the kitchen where Tynes giggled as she finished the last of the courses. When they all had settled on the couch, Tynes picked a movie based on the title. It turned out to be a comedy about two strangers ending up in the middle of nowhere by accident. But as soon as the first romantic mood hit, she was reminded again of Asitha's teasing and blushed. She glanced sideways and the stance of Asitha's ear told her something similar was on her mind. What Olan was thinking, she couldn't read from his expression, but it seemed he just enjoyed the movie and thought nothing more of it. It put her mind at ease, and she figured these kinds of things were everyday occurrences for humans. She figured she'd probably think nothing of it soon enough as well. Alan tried not to compare the situation in the movie to him and the Sylph girls. Two strangers is not the same as two different species, he thought. Besides, we're talking about movies and not reality. He glanced sideways at the girls. I don't even compare to one of their own strong males. He tensed his body a little. Maybe some extra training would be good. By the end of the movie, all three were left with a warm and cheerful feeling, and Alain chuckled as he retracted the screen and turned on the music again. And they lived happily ever after. "They did?" asked Tynes. He stretched. "It's a stereotypical ending to old fairy tales in my world, and sometimes it's used as a joke when the expectation is that the characters are going to end up fighting again after a while." Tynes giggled. "Humans are silly," Alain grinned. "You're definitely right about that." Asitha's tail quivered as she stretched. "I can understand why our government is hesitant to open up to you humans. Too unpredictable from our viewpoint." Alain chuckled. I don't blame them one bit. The girls gathered the food they prepared for the next cycles, and Alain gazed at the amount they left behind. Are you sure to leave all this? Tynes gave him a warm smile. Take it as part of paying you back. I think I won't have to cook much until you come by again, thanks. She giggled. Unless you eat everything at once. He grinned. I'm tempted to anyway, but I'll try to hold back and not burst out of my suit soon. The girls took their spacesuits, but Tynes hesitated for a moment and hung it back, then turned to Alain. She suspected the drink suppressed her normal behavior, but she didn't care, and she hugged Alain just as the woman had done with the man in the movie. Thank you for coming to me. His heart pounded at the unexpected hug, but he hugged her back after a moment. As I said, no problem. She pulled back and blushed as she put on her suit and stepped into the airlock with Asitha. They waved goodbye when they rounded the pod and went towards their own pod along the Walkyria's hull. It's beginning to look like one of our stories now, chuckled Asitha. I was just doing the same ritual humans do to express their thanks. You saw the movie? I did, said Asitha and decided to wait to see what might happen for her amusement. Tynes felt hot under the collar while her consciousness began questioning the boldness of her move. Alain felt giddy when he dropped into his bed while the sensation of Tynes's softness lingered against his body. The resolve to not ask if he could pet and stroke them cracked. Crap. Something wrong? Asked Asitha over the communicator a few days later. Alain blew sweat from his nose. Not really, but I need to pull some stuck debris out of the way for this task and it makes me sweat a lot, he said and turned down the suit's cooling a notch. It makes me wish I could take a good and long relaxing bath, but all I have is standard showers in the pods. Even the one in the new pod isn't much bigger. The one we have now is a really good one. It's roomy and our fur is sprayed from all sides while we're floating. It simulates floating in water the way we like to do at home. Alain imagined his body getting sprayed by cool water. That sounds really great about now. She chuckled. Want to try? Alain blew another drop of sweat from the tip of his nose. Can I? Yes, you let us borrow your kitchen. So why not borrow our shower? I'll come over when you're done with your work. All right. Alain pulled on a panel to bend it out of the way with renewed vigor from the thought of taking that luxurious shower. Alain observed how Tynes worked the controls and explained their purpose. I think I get it, he said and looked once more around the spacious shower cabin. Thanks for showing me. Tynes gave him a quick smile. I hope you'll find it as soothing as we do. He chuckled. I'm already convinced I will. She gestured behind her. I have to return to my work, but take your time. Thanks again, he said and took the bag with his towel and change of clothes, while Tynes donned her suit, then realized there was no changing room to undress in. He stepped back towards the airlock to ask Tynes, but heard the hiss of its cycle. With both Asitha and Tynes working, he figured he wouldn't have to confront them with a close look at the human anatomy and undressed, although still quickly. Inside the cabin, he turned off the artificial gravity and turned on the nozzles which covered him in a cocoon of mist. Immediately, the sensation of floating in water rushed over him, and he closed his eyes while every muscle in his body relaxed and sweat and fatigue washed away from him. Asitha looked pleased at the container of equipment she had recovered in less time than expected. Some of them had become exposed and made for easier disassembling. She took the container and pushed it in front of her while she pushed herself towards the outside service hatch and towards the probe waiting to return at the next scheduled departure. She secured it inside the short row of cargo compartments, which made it look like a dragonfly with miniature containers along its body, and went into the crew pod to quench the thirst that plagued her during the last task. Alain startled awake and panicked for a moment from disorientation before his brain kicked in and he remembered where he was. He relaxed again and took several deep breaths to energize himself, then rinsed himself in the mist of water after lowering the temperature a bit to a refreshing setting, and engaged gravity when he felt more clean than he'd done since arriving at the job. He held onto a rung while his feet touched down on the floor and stepped out of the cabin in a cheerful mood. Asitha nearly spat out her drink of water when he stepped out bare naked in front of her. Tynes laughed at the blushing faces of Asitha and Alain after she heard the reason why Asitha and Alain avoided looking at each other when she returned to the pod later. I guess there's not much more left to hide between us, she giggled. Alon groaned. If I knew this would have happened, I would have spent more time in the trainer. Trainer? Sniggered Tynus. A harness that provides resistance and simulates physical exercise. Tynus nodded and looked at Asitha. Good thing you weren't about to take a shower yourself. Asitha coughed. Don't make it worse, she said, and was really glad she hadn't indeed. She didn't like to think about what might have happened if he saw her in the fur. Alam finished the drink Asitha had poured for him and herself to calm down after the first mutual apologies and stood up. Thank you again for the use of your shower. It was a really good experience. He couldn't quite suppress a chuckle, by which I mean the shower itself. Tynus smiled at him. Don't hesitate to make use of it again, even if this time it turned out to be a surprise. We'll just have to put up a sign or something. He chuckled once. Warning, close encounters of the naked kind, he said softly, then gave her a quick smile. I don't want to impose too much. I was already happy to take this one. Tynus giggled. Well, if you dare to take another one, let us know. They waved him goodbye as he left for his own pod, and Tynus turned to Asitha. So tell me, how did he look? Are they anything like our males? Asitha blushed at the memory. I didn't really see. Tynus giggled. That's not what you look like. Was he that good to look at? Asitha looked up at her. No, she said and averted her eyes. I mean, it wasn't bad. Tynus leaned closer. Come on, tell me. I'm curious. Asitha sighed. Fine, she said and sat back in her seat. He only has some fur down there, and his anatomy is fully exposed. Tynus's eyes went wide. Exposed? How? Asitha tried not to focus on the memory. Just exposed, she said and poured herself another drink. I don't know how else to say it. Tynus sniggered and leaned back. Guess I'll have to wait until I accidentally get to see it for myself. Asitha? Tynus? I think there's something you need to see, said Alon over the communicator as he looked at the detection system of the Valkyria. Something bad? Asked Asitha. I don't know, but an unknown vessel is coming our way. We'll come over as soon as we're done here. The girls looked at the printout and the small rectangle with a dotted line crossing the position of the warships. It's not from either of our worlds. The system can't identify it even if it can give probabilities from emissions from the vessel, said Alon and tapped on another list with numbers. It's either a clump of various vessels from other worlds, or it's a completely new technology not based on any current ones. We can't tell anything from this. Asitha looked at Tynus. As far as I know, we're not expecting anything soon from our side, apart from the next cargo probe. That one is not due to arrive around this time, though. Alain nodded. Same here. We'll just have to wait until it gets closer to find out what's going on. We'd better prepare to hide our close contact if it plans to arrive here. Tynus pouted. Does that mean we'd have to eat only our Sylph food? Alain laughed. I hope that would be the worst thing that could happen, he said and smiled. I propose compensating in advance. I brought containers with scampi for today. They're a popular seafood. Tynus pricked up her ears and licked her lips. I'm all for that suggestion. Asitha chuckled. I don't mind.